our host, the world-renowned Christine Enville, an IFBB professional, 3 times world champion, a mentor, an icon, and of course, a founding co-owner of the best supplements money can buy, International Protein. In this episode, we chat about how it sucks to get injured and how it stops so many athletes in their professional careers. Christine shares her advice on how to rehabilitate and how to push through so you minimise your loss of momentum. Okay, Christine, let's talk about injuries and what it can do to someone's career, how it can sort of really derail them. You know, I know in my time, if I got a shoulder injury, because I used to do a little bit of MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you know, if I did a shoulder, I'd be really, I guess, aware of it and wouldn't want to damage it even further, so I'd almost stop training. And that lack of momentum, especially in bodybuilding, must be absolutely essential to sort of be able to work around it. So you must have been injured in your career several times, which you had a loss of momentum. How did you handle it and how did you continue on?
Cool. Well, yes, I did have a pretty serious injury. When I come back to compete in, I think it was 2012, I had a bit of a layoff from professional competition, and I got back into my training, and I was literally 4 weeks out from my comeback show. And I'd had now and again, there's a difference between an injury and a niggle, I guess. But I will talk about the niggles. But I had a pain in my elbow for probably about 6 months. But you know, you keep on training. But eventually it just tore off, like the whole bone came away on my elbow, on my right arm, and my tricep detached. So that was pretty devastating, you know, 4 weeks out from my competition. The thing that I kept in mind was it was fixable. I mean, I didn't know that, of course, when I did it, but in my mind, it was fixable, and I would just keep going and I would be back on stage. So I think
you sort of just glazed over that. Your tricep detached.
Yes.
That must have been excruciating.
Kind of yes and no. Like when it first happened, it was actually relief, believe it or not, because it had given me so much pain, and yet probably why you're thinking, why on earth were you still training?
Yeah.
But it had given me so much like chronic pain that when it actually let go, it was a feeling of relief before the pain kind of hit.
But you are superhuman, aren't you?
No, it was a Saturday afternoon, and I had a little bit of a flu, so I probably shouldn't have been training either. But again, this is the kind of stuff that you do when you have a very important show. You push yourself. And I remember we stopped off at there was a Night Owl or one of those convenience stores, and we grabbed a bag of frozen peas to stick on my elbow and rush down to the emergency down at, I think it's Pindara, the one down there. But they could only do x-rays at the time. I had to wait to do all the ultrasounds and whatnot. But I kind of wasn't even convinced that it was necessarily torn until I realized that I couldn't move, I couldn't connect. But yeah, I have torn a hamstring before, and believe me, the hamstring was like 1,000 times more painful than what this one particularly was. But we'll talk about the hamstring later. It came off. Obviously, just had to be totally basically pulled back down and pinned in. It was a clean injury because it didn't tear the muscle as much as the bone actually gave way with the tendon still attached to it. And that was just like a what I call them, a bone spur that had just pulled. And that was literally just like years and years of weight training where it had kind of like almost stretched my bone. And if people can relate to that, like it just...
I think everyone's getting a really good visual.
A complete visual of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I can definitely relate to not sort of realising you've done that much damage until you actually do something with it, right? You
go to put, you don't realize how much you use your tricep for even writing, the twisting your hand around as you go to use a pen to write, and you just can't move. Or I use my hand to push something away, and you don't have that. You know, think of any tricep movement that you do, like a tricep push down or a kickback. You don't have that movement. Nothing's connected. Your brain's saying push that away, and your arm's just sitting there. And you're kind of puzzled as to why it's not doing anything, because literally it's not attached. The strings aren't attached. Basically that's it. But essentially what it was getting the surgeon and kind of saying, okay, what's the situation? And obviously in that situation it was great news. It was yep, we can fix this and you will be good to go, but you can't train for 4 months. Following all of the processes that they tell you. So you have a time frame. So in my head, I'm cool, longer than what I had hoped, but it wasn't like he's saying, you're never going to train again or anything like that. It's just pretty much, okay, follow this process, have a great success rate, and you'll be good. So I think the main thing was listening to what the doctors and the surgeons were saying and doing the proper rehab, because that was another kind of point where I had to go and see a specialist, like elbow, and I think they did shoulders and elbows for rehab. And and they would tell me do 20 reps a day, 20 reps at a time, but 10 times a day, take your splint off and try to do a bicep curl. And if anyone who has had like tricep surgery, literally your arm is stuck straight. You can't bend your arm once the surgery comes out because it's all so tight. And if you bend it too much, you're kind of, chances you're going to rip the pins that are being put in. So you're literally sitting there doing a curl that moves like a millimeter.
Right.
And you're doing that like, okay, there's my 20 reps and I feel like I'm doing nothing. But as you go through the rehab, they kind of encourage you to get, okay, now you need to get to like, a 10-degree bend, now you need to get to a 20-degree bend. They kind of give you a target of where you were trying to get to, even if you have to force it with your hands. They're like, okay, slowly, we're forcing you to get that movement back, because I think number one, getting the movement back is critical. And it kind of hit home to me when I was maybe 4 or 5 weeks into the rehab, because they don't let you start that for a couple of weeks. And there was a young kid who'd injured himself playing rugby, and he was about, 12 weeks into his rehab, and he didn't have his movement back. And turns out, he hadn't been doing his physio. He hadn't been listening. He was just like, oh yeah, whatever. Kind of took for granted, I guess, that it would just come back. And I think it was at that point there that I realized that, shoot, there is actually a chance that this thing won't return to normal if you don't do what you're told. So one of the things is really just being mindful of that. And then the other thing is, there was a couple of friends of mine that I'd known through bodybuilding who'd had Achilles injuries. And I know that they'd been told, don't go in the gym, this, that, and the other. And I know that 2 weeks later, they were back trying to squat, and boom, what do you know, it pulled off,
Right.
So there's that temptation to try to go and, oh yeah, it feels all right, I can move it a little bit, I'm sure it can take it. But understanding, the doctor explained to me the time frame in terms of what happens when, and where you've actually got, a pin screwed into the bone. So you need to let the bone start to knit. And that happens at this month to this month. And then you need to let it happen, like recalcify, which happens at this time and this time. So he said to me, like, if you were not doing sport, then obviously at 3 months, they normally get people to go back and start doing certain things. He said, but if you want success and you want to be able to put the stress through this thing that you have been putting through it, then you need to have that extra month. And he said it's like an injury that mostly it's football players who get. And he said he hadn't had not one person who'd had a failure because they'd gone to that 4-month mark. So that's not that I didn't train for 4 months. That's just that I didn't use my elbow for 4 months. So what I did was basically kept my same routine. So, obviously have a training system where you do legs on one day and chest on another, delts, whatever you're doing. I literally kept that. I was mindful that, people talk about not wanting to kind of get an imbalance in your body, but I realized that that's going to be caught up very quickly once you get back to training. So I figured I'll keep the other side moving. But what I did find out is that when you're only doing one side of a lateral raise, you actually rely on the balance of the other side to allow you to do the weight that you can do. So I found that even if I had have wanted to, and because I couldn't, because people do one arm lateral raises, no problem, but they're hanging on to like a bar or something to support themselves.
Yeah.
You can't do that when your arm's not strong enough to do that. So you're literally trying to stand there, do a lateral raise. So you are limiting the weight that you can do, but I kept doing it. But I would do like 100 reps.
Okay, so your main thing was just to keep turning up every day, just, I guess, isolating that area, not using it whatsoever, and then doing everything else around it.
Yeah, just keeping the routine, because I think, and that's probably like really relevant to COVID as well. It's not just relevant to injury, but the people who've come through COVID and got back into the groove a lot better are the people who've maintained some kind of routine as to their exercise program. And I've talked to a lot of different people who've done it different, and some people who've just gone, didn't like it was boring doing it at home, I didn't like it, and they're sort of struggling to get back into the groove again, because you do get out of habit, and 3 months is a long time, and 3, 4, I can kind of relate the injury recovery time somewhat to the COVID layoff time in terms of when the gyms are being closed. So it's very easy for those habits to slip out. So there were 2 things I was really mindful of. One was I didn't want my body fat and my body weight to go too out of control, because obviously when you're not doing the activity that you were doing, because we recognize that weights does actually burn a lot of calories, so my metabolic requirements would have gone right down. I was coming off a comp diet, so I was very lean at the time, so I didn't want that to all just totally blow out. So I actually had to be very mindful, and I kept myself on a diet. So I actually was eating less than what I was eating on the diet for the comp, because my metabolic requirements were down. And that was really important too, because I had met someone who had a pretty bad injury, and when I met them, they were very overweight, and they said, look, I was actually a very fit person. But what I did was I pretty much let everything go. So just from seeing people around me who had done that, that wasn't going to be what I was going to do. I was really going to make a conscious effort to keep on also on my eating routine and really keep my body weight under control, because I didn't want two things to happen. And that would be one, trying to bring my body back under control and try to get my training back on track. So it takes conscious effort and discipline, but you have to do that. You have to treat it like a process. That one is, you have your rehab that you're doing, and number two, you've got your nutrition, and number three, you've got your routine. So literally, I would do whatever I could. And if it meant doing 100 reps because that's what it took to fatigue on my little 3 kilo dumbbell that I was doing on my lateral raise, or bicep curl, or whatever, because there's so much that you can do single arm, and with machines you can press just one side. So it really was just to keep the blood flow in, and just to keep that time frame that I would be spending at the gym, so that I wasn't kind of slotting something else in there, because it can very easily happen that you find that you might enjoy doing that thing more, and you just kind of like enjoy sitting on the couch watching the soapies or whatever it is that you might do. So getting into the gym and then just seeing people around you and talking to them, and hey, it's always fun talking about an injury. My goodness. When you've injured yourself for like 2 years afterwards, I think that's all that comes up in conversation.
And then it becomes an excuse.
Yeah, but if you're at the gym talking about it, that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the main thing, was that I had a plan that I would keep in that system and keep doing what I could do. I knew that once I got back into things, that any disparity in size would come back. Now, the one thing I wasn't ready for was exactly how much you shrink and how quickly. Like, I thought it would be like a gradual progression where my arm would get smaller and smaller from not being used. I literally came out of surgery, they unbandaged it, and I went, where is my arm?
Wow.
Like I had no idea that would be the case. So it was like this little tweak, and I'm like, holy moly, like it literally vanished on the operating table.
Yeah.
So I wasn't ready for that. But the really good news was, and this is a fascinating thing about muscle growth to me, was that as soon as I was able to, so at month 1, I was allowed to take the fiberglass cast thing off that kept it straight. And I think by that month 1, I pretty much had 90-degree movement back again, and I was allowed to get around without the cast. And just things like brushing your teeth and lifting up a cup of coffee actually grew muscle. Think about that. A cup of coffee would weigh, 200-300 grams, not even a kilo. And just doing like that, just giving your body movement, I could see the muscle starting to come back. So I think that gave me a lot of confidence that by the 4-month mark, as soon as I got back into it, it'd be fine. I think when getting back into the gym, it then becomes the fear of hurting it again. Like you do hold back a little bit from pushing. Yeah. So you need to spend like maybe the next kind of 1 to 2 months, I guess, gaining that confidence and just doing movements, but not overstressing it, because, mentally, you just have that vision of what if it just comes ping and comes flying off again.
On the flip side, having the discipline to actually grow into it as well, instead of getting too excited and lifting too much too soon.
Yeah, because your body will tell you. Because I think, partway along there where I was allowed to take my little thing off, I got a bit excited and I thought, I can just like do 1 kilo on this side and do some lateral raises with it. It swelled up like I don't know what.
Yeah, right.
Back to the doctor. He's checked it for an infection and he goes, have you happened to have been using this? I was honest and I said, yes. He goes, don't. Right. Like, just don't. So I tested it. Just did a little bit of a test. No heavy weight, just that 1 kilo. And the stress of pressure on it from doing a lateral raise with 1 kilo was enough to really blow it up. So learned a lot from that and really sort of said, okay, I'm going to settle back down. I'm just going to wait. And then when it comes back in. But as soon as they said, 4-month mark, you'll be good to go. Everything's healed enough and strong enough that you can do stuff, then trust that as well. But ease back into it so you're not kind of doing anything too sudden, and really learning what to do and not to do. I think we also changed my training system at that point as well. I was obviously older, I was 39, around, 39, nearly 40 at the time. And I realized I couldn't train like a 25-year-old. So I was still, when I did the injury, training like every muscle group twice a week, 6 days, training 6 days a week, every muscle group twice a week. So we actually went back to, I ended up doing legs only once a week. And then I took every body part just once a week and just changed my whole training program. So it was giving me more time to recover. So I think that's one of the things that, with injury, what I know is that sometimes people come back better from an injury because your training system might be that you're just going heavy, for example, and that's not necessarily the best way to train. So sometimes when you come out of that, you get more creative about what you can and can't do, and you focus more on like the mind muscle connection. You focus more on drop sets and things where you'll find with every injury that there'll be that point where sometimes it's the absolute weight and sometimes it's like the number of reps that really kind of aggravates it. So as far as, I was never, I don't even bench press anymore because that was what did it. And I really feel the pressure on the points, like whereas dumbbells give you that little bit more flexibility, but I'm not going to go, like there's a point where over that weight, you really feel it's not productive on your joints and it can cause a problem. So you find more creative ways of getting the work into your muscle. So I think that some positive things that come out of an injury is that you get more creative with your training and you think about it more and you don't just rely purely on heavy weight to do what you want to do. But, the key thing there with keeping that momentum is look past the injury, like look past where you are now and look to when you're back. So if they're saying 4 months, then my focus was on 4 months time. Like it was just like getting through. And then it was on that, but it was also on the comp that I wanted to do, like that same comp, but a year later. So obviously I missed the one in 2012, but I went back in 2013 and I did that competition. So within 12 months I was back.
So you always had a goal that you were aiming for.
Yeah. I didn't let it, like I had no doubt in my mind that I was going to be able to do that. So that really kind of kept me going. Like I didn't.
How'd you go on that comp?
I didn't actually go that well because it was my debut back after 10 years.
Yep.
And if you looked at the photos, I felt I did really well, but politically I came like, I don't know, 12th or 13th or something like that. The next show I did like months later, I jumped up to like 7th. So that told me it was just like, okay, who the hell are you? Where have you been? And they didn't know where to put me. And then the fact that I went up so dramatically to the next show told me that they were like, okay, yep, tick, you're okay. And then that year I pretty much sat around that 6th, 7th, and then the next year I got 3rds and qualified for the Olympia. So that's a whole other process that we might have talked about where, you need to understand that it's not necessarily about how good you are. There's a process that you have to go through as a professional to really kind of get accepted and recognized. And then, which direction you're moving at the shows rather than the absolute placing. If I had stayed in that 14th place kind of thing at every show I'd done that year, I would have gone, they probably really don't like me. But the fact that I'd moved up, I knew that if I just kept presenting what I was presenting, that I would do okay, which I did. So yeah, that was after about a 10-year break off the professional stage. So it was definitely interesting.
You need to earn your stripes again, eh?
Yes, you do. Absolutely do.
So you talked about your hammy as well. What did you do?
Well, I wasn't competing at the time. I was retired and I put a motorbike down on my hamstring and basically ripped it right at the top.
Off-road, on-road?
It was just test riding a bike, to be honest. It was an unfamiliar bike and it jumped, like I hit the handbrake and it really dove to one side, which none of my bikes did that. And it was tall, like it was a tall bike because normally when I get a bike, I have to get it adjusted, get the springs and everything. So when I was test riding, we weren't really thinking about that. And it's just unfortunate that my legs weren't long enough to support and it jumped a hell of a lot more than what I was expecting. So it took me down with a big pop. But the stupid thing was because I wasn't competing, I really wasn't that worried. Like that hurt like hell. Like that was like pass out kind of pain. That was how painful that was.
Yeah.
Black from top to bottom, swelled up, could barely get my pants off. But all I did there was, because it was a rip rather than it was probably multiple rips because it's a kind of a mess. But I would go, like as soon as I could kind of move, I would start walking. And then I got into the gym. I obviously couldn't train legs and a rip is different. So it was only like a 6-week time frame. So I would just ride the bike just to keep the blood going into that muscle and just to keep, again, basically to flush out, I guess, all of the old dead blood cells from the bruise, and then just went back into my normal legs training. So it didn't have a long-term impact in terms of, probably a little bit of an imbalance when I squatted. I noticed that would be a little tighter on that side, but I didn't have anything kind of attended to medically. I didn't even get scans or anything because I was like, I'm not competing. I don't really care. But what I did find was when I did come back to compete, I had to get a hell of a lot of scar tissue massaged and a lot of physio because I actually couldn't flex my quad properly to the front because there was that much tightness in the hamstring at the back. So my piece of advice would be that, I guess it shows how I approached it differently when I wasn't competing to when I was, because when I was competing, and any injury that I have ever done whilst in actively competing, I straight away go get scans done, get it assessed, if need be, go to a specialist and get their opinion on it and figure out a course of action. With this, it was just like, yeah, whatever, I can still train. Yeah, it's only a rip, even though it's like a massive bruising. Not, didn't really faze me at all, but, just got back into my training as quickly as possible. But, the price that I paid for that was, like, say, a hell of a lot of ultrasound and deep tissue massage and stuff to really break up those knots. And then, now I can flex it no problem. But, when I first went back to go to compete and started to try to hit my mandatory poses and realized I couldn't flex my legs, it was just so tight. So that moral of that story is obviously it would have been much better if I had the massage done while the scar tissue was still fresh. It probably wouldn't even have built up at all. But that's that thing where I guess I only took things seriously when I was competing, because then I had another injury, which is actually what retired me, was when my rotator cuff tore. Yeah. This one was,
which is pretty common.
It is very common. But this is the thing with weights and pushing yourself. There's that fine line between feeling like or being smarter and kind of saying, is there another way to tackle this, versus pushing on and kind of doing the same thing. So because I had an injury before, when it happened, like just a little bit of a tear, but then like followed up with probably like a really big tear about 3 weeks later, because I didn't stop enough of what I was doing, because I could still do stuff. So unfortunately, I'm one of those people that if I can...
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah, you kind of still push it. So I felt that I needed to keep the density, but I wasn't so worried, because I was like, oh yeah, not a problem. I'll just get it fixed up like what my tricep was. I can still do everything except straight overhead. Like I could do incline, pressing. I just couldn't do directly over my head. And so there's a couple of things I couldn't do, and I managed to get through to stage. Then I didn't worry about getting it looked at until after, because as I said, it wasn't like I was totally, like the tricep I literally couldn't do. I couldn't even flex my bicep with the tricep, because it's the antagonist to the bicep. And I guess you forget that, how your body's set up in that way, that everything has an agonist and an antagonist, and you need your tricep to be stable to be able to even create a bicep and flex your bicep. So I couldn't even pose if I wanted to, whereas this tear was obviously not complete. I could still do 90% of things. But then I tore my bicep and sprained my wrist kind of just after the competition. So my whole left side had fairly major injuries. Comp was over, so I did go and get all of my scans and everything. And there was a tear, and that's when they said, oh look, it's just a bicep tear, but nothing that needs to be like surgically fixed, because your tendons are still intact, just a sprain, whatever. Go off to the surgeon, happens to be the same surgeon who did my tricep. So yeah, because it hits shoulders and elbows. And he said, no surgery for this one, because he said basically your tendons are such a state of, after so many years of training, that they have thin points in a lot of places. So he said, if I fix this one here, you're just going to put the pressure on somewhere else, and you're going to then rip that part. So he said, is it causing you pain? And I said, well, not really. He goes, well, then until it's causing you pain and you can't actually move, he goes, don't even think about surgery, because it's like a year process as opposed to 4 months. So tricep 4 months, shoulder was a year. But that's that specific one, because I know other people who had shoulder injuries, and they say it's, theirs was only 3 months. So it really depends on what every single injury is. So I think the moral of that is you got to go get it assessed.
And you were talking niggles before versus injuries. Is
yeah.
that sort of...
Well, niggles are normally the indicator that something's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's why, like with my my tricep, for example, the niggle that had been there was like a chronic, very, very sharp pain that came in on tricep pushdowns, came in on bench press, it came in on so many different things. But I didn't, like, I had kind of had it looked at, and it was something that I had, okay, once the comp's over, I'll get this looked at, because it wasn't, it was painful, but it wasn't the end of the world. And I think, that's thing where, like, you can think in hindsight, maybe we should have rested it or something, but at the same time, I'm thinking it was going to happen anyway, because I wasn't going to not keep putting probably too much pressure. Like any kind of weights would have been too much pressure, because of the fact that it was the bone thinning out. So I think it was more just an indicator. Whereas sometimes you have an injury, you just have like a week off, or what they say, you try to break the inflammatory cycle. And a lot of the time, obviously what the pain is inflammation. So sometimes what I've been recommended by sports doctors and that is just take like a hit of your Voltaren or something like that, and that just kind of stops the inflammation cycle enough that then and rest for 2 weeks or something, and then it it goes away and it pretty much doesn't come back. So it really depends on what every single thing is. Whereas I've had other niggles where I have gone to the sports doctor, and it was an elbow problem, and it turns out there was like calcification of some of the tendons and a couple of other things, and they did a treatment on it, and I can't think of the name of the actual treatment, but it's basically like a pneumatic hammer and ultrasound, and they basically get in and break up the calcification.
Interesting.
And I had about 4 treatments of that, and it was good as gold.
Right.
So I think the thing is to go and find out what the problem is.
You called them a sports doctor before. What kind of sports doctor?
Just a general practitioner who specialises in sport. So you obviously got like a general practitioner who sees everyone from the cold through to everything. So I always used to go to the I can't remember the name of the place. It was up in Brisbane. They have one at the Gabba. They have like a facility at the Gabba where they have a lot of the treatments. And then they have the one in some of them like right in the centre of Brisbane, and I think it's just called like Queensland Sports Medicine or something like that. And they specialise in seeing athletes. So as opposed to a normal doctor who generally, like, 2 things: you go to a normal doctor, they sign you straight away to a specialist, or they tell you just don't train for until it comes good again, which is not useful for an athlete. Like they have normally a program or a plan. Like they will say. Like they understand that you need to compete, you need to get on stage, so they will have a workaround. So whether it be, okay, we can do cortisone, even though long-term cortisone isn't good, but that'll get you through to where you need to be. Then you can come back, get your event out the way, come back now, we'll have this treatment plan.
So would you go to a specialist sports practice before you'd go to a physio?
Yes.
Because the sports practice might recommend you to a physio,
absolutely,
but they're more well-rounded.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of people, that just go straight to the physio.
Yeah. The thing is, if you know you've just like tweaked your neck, like you've got a little bit of that feels like a bit of a strain or something like that. Like it kind of depends, I guess, if you can identify like exactly when it happened and what it was. Like if you wake up one morning with a stiff neck, then you're probably just going to go to the physio, because it could just be leads a little bit of massage, a little bit of heat treatment and stuff, or where I have had, or like with my hamstring, where I knew that the tightness was just really due to scar tissue. I couldn't do a specific thing. So, I knew I didn't want to have like surgery to have it broken back and attached and that. So I knew I just needed to have that done. So some of it is just experience and knowing, but generally, that the sports doctor will send you to the right spots, because obviously he didn't do the treatment, to the pneumatic ultrasoundy treatment. He sent me off to the Gabba where they have the rooms, and a specialist person did that particular treatment there. Or he might recommend you go to a chiropractor. So they can still recommend you to different people. But like I say, they can also, because they are doctors, they can prescribe specific medicine if you need it. They might recommend that you go and have the PRP, the blood spinning, and try that kind of thing. So they actually have a really, really good view of all the different things. And they would even kind of say to me like, okay, what is your goal? Okay, we try this now, then we do that, and then we do that. So they'll have like an actual sequence of what to do. Like where I had my shoulder done, an elbow, I went back to them when I did an extensor tear. They now have they were just surgeons, but now they have a sports doctor on hand as well. And again, he looks like someone who does a lot of sport. So I think he also kind of understands. So he understands, one, the psychology, that to tell a person who does sport, just rest for a month and with no plan, no program, that's kind of a devastating thing. Like you always need to have a plan of action, and because then you say, well, what happens in a month when it hasn't come good? What do I do? Whereas if you're actively working on something and fixing something. So yeah, I always recommend if you just go to your GP, ask to be referred. If you need a referral, otherwise look for a specific sports medicine place and see if they will take you. If you're an athlete, because they will have a way, way, way broader array of things that they can give you access to, and they will also understand what you need to do at that particular point in time.
Look, that's really, really good advice. Let's just wrap this up. And what would be your advice for someone, if we were to summarize it, someone that's just got an injury, they're out for 4 weeks? What's your ultimate advice?
Oh, firstly, have they had themselves checked? Like, do they know what the actual cause is? Is it sprained? Is it ripped?
The question was too broad, wasn't it?
It was way too broad.
I don't know. Pick one. You create the scenario. You're the expert.
Well, let's assume that you have had all of your scans done and it's just a sprain and you've been told not to move that particular thing. You might have been put in a brace, okay? And they've said, don't do anything that is not able to be done in that brace, I would then do everything else that I possibly could.
Right.
So I would just keep my routine, and if it means that I can use half of my body, still train my legs, I would do exactly that. I would still be in the gym. I would still be I wouldn't be not doing activity. So if it meant that I couldn't do a HIIT cardio session, then I'd get on and ride the bike or whatever you can do that doesn't require that arm.
Cool.
So yeah, that's what I'll be doing.
Really valuable stuff. Thank you very much, Christine. If anybody's got any questions, jump on Aussie Muscle Guru, our Facebook page, and fire away. We might answer them on these podcasts.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Words of wisdom. If you like what you've heard, recognize that these tips, they're free. So show your support by becoming a loyal international protein customer by jumping online, hunt our product down, and hit that buy now button. So once again, like, share, and subscribe to our podcast so we can continue to bring you these episodes from our one and only Aussie Muscle Guru, 3 times world champion, Christine Enville.